Uncontrollable. Unstoppable. Inescapable. The ultimate weapon is about to meet its match.
Jim, you're about to be brought in on this country's best-kept secret.
She's activated.
Dear God.
What do you mean she's activated?
Dark Horse presents Diablo Franken and Paul Higg. Done secondary objectives. Terminator now!
It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear. And it absolutely will not stop. Ever. Until you are dead.
Excerpt from the May 1991 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 190. Newsline. Terminator one-shot from Dark Horse, Beetlejuice from Harvey. The $5.95 Terminator one-shot reveals that the Terminator played by Arnie was only the second Terminator sent into the past. This 48-page special by Robinson and Matt Wagner shows the attempts of a female 800 model to kill John Connor's mother. Scheduled to coincide with the release of Terminator 2, the color special has a full-color, 3D, construction collage piece covered by Wagner, and a special effect that Dark Horse believes has never been done before in comics ever. Also, Dark Horse's original Terminator series will be collected into a $12.95 softcover with a new cover painting by John Bolton.
According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, the Terminator one-shot was released on June 25th, 1991, as evidenced by a house ad in Dark Horse Presents number 51. That was 2 to 3 months after the release of the trade paperback collection of the first miniseries, which had ended 7 to 8 months earlier. The ongoing series of A Different Terminator debuted that same month, with Slade Wilson now preferring the non-mercenary Deathstroke, specifically to avoid trademark issues with the Cameron property. DC also released the first issues of their Archie Comics licenses The Comet and the Jaguar under the Impact imprint. Marvel's licensing was somewhat more embarrassing, as they offered the first edition of NFL Super Pro. Eternity Comics produced the sequel Plan 9 from Outer Space. 30 years later, Harvey revisited Tom and Jerry and Woody Woodpecker, and innovation launched Quantum Leap.
Excerpt from the June 1991 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 191. Coming distractions for June. Dark Horse offers Cheval Noir number 19, Concrete Fragile Creature number 2, Dark Horse Presents number 51, Outlanders number 30, Predator Big Game number 4, Tank Girl number 2, The Venus Wars number 3, The Terminator Collection reprints the Terminator miniseries by Arcudi, Warner, and Guinan, color softcover, $12.95, ships June, and The Terminator One-Shot, a special story about a female Terminator sent to kill Sarah Connor. Are the time travel traffic lanes getting a little busy by now?
I was a late comer to the first movie because I was a bit of a horror scaredy cat and I was worried it would be a bit scary, but I eventually caught it on video, and I was, front row center for Terminator 2 with my wife when that came out. Well, I think we were engaged then anyway. But all aboard for that, and what a great film. As far as the comics, I think I wanted to get the first Terminator comic with Now releasing it, but I couldn't get it off the stand, so I just gave up. But I do remember picking up The Burning Earth and selling it. So, I thought the art was pretty, but nothing else was behind that. But beyond that, I was an early big fan of James Robinson, so I kept an eye out for anything he did and collected it, basically. The Terminator stuff I still have is all the James Robinson stuff, which is the Terminator One-Shot, as it's sometimes called, Secondary Objectives, and Endgame. I just reread them all just for this chat for you recently.
Excerpt from the September 1991 cover dated Comic Scene Spectacular number 5, Terminal Consequences by Eric Niederost. At first, they didn't succeed, so those Terminators are trying again and again. Sequels aren't easy to do, especially if the parent project was enormously successful. Public expectations are raised, and inevitably, a sequel is compared to its predecessor. Whatever the medium, books, movies, TV, it's a rare sequel that lives up to the original. Writer James Robinson knows all about these perils, because he's scripting Dark Horse's Terminator Secondary Objectives, a follow-up to the first 4-book Terminator series, penned by John Arcudi and drawn by Chris Warner, as discussed in Comic Scene number 15. And to satisfy the seemingly insatiable demand for Terminator material, Robinson is also writing a separate tale appropriately titled Terminator One-Shot. Of course, all this ink is being spilled thanks to the original Terminator movie, the 1984 hit that starred Arnold Schwarzenegger. In fact, One-Shot is scheduled for June, with secondary objectives following as Terminator 2 Judgment Day, the movie sequel again top-lining Schwarzenegger, hits theaters this month. Robinson is working with 2 artists on the Terminator tales, Matt Wagner on one shot and Paul Gulacy on secondary objectives. The comic scribe credits Matt Wagner for getting him involved with Terminator. Matt and I, Robinson explains, have known each other for a long time. We worked on the 6-issue Grindel Tales, and he was thoroughly acquainted with my writing. When he was offered one shot, he asked me to write it, which was a great compliment. The 2 Terminator titles are entirely separate from one another, with different plots and characters. Secondary Objectives, he explains, is a continuation of the storyline from the first series, which was written by John Arcudi. It follows from whatever he has done. By the same token, Terminator One Shot is a special that's totally independent. After a pause, he adds playfully, the one shot of the title is a play on words. It is a one-shot, one-time tale, but it's also an aspect of the story. The plot of Terminator One Shot rests with a case of mistaken identity. To wit, a Terminator goes after the wrong Sarah Connor. The way Robinson tells it, One Shot is a prequel to the first film, in that it begins shortly before Schwarzenegger's character takes his trip to our present. This other Terminator Robinson details is a female, sent back moments before Schwarzenegger's Terminator. Her mission is the same, kill Sarah Connor. The female Terminator finds a Sarah Connor who has just gotten married, and is honeymooning in San Francisco. But this Sarah Connor isn't the Sarah Connor. Connor is her married name, her original name being Sarah Lang. This Sarah Connor has married her husband Michael to kill him and take over his vast wealth. So while she's trying to kill him, the Terminator is trying to kill her. And at the same time, says Robinson, warming to his subject, One Shot features a mysterious middle-aged man named Ruggles. He's a retired policeman, 30 years on the force, and he puts 2 and 2 together about the female Terminator. They meet in San Francisco. But who can the readers root for? After all, the Sarah Connor in One Shot is a would-be murderess, just as deadly and despicable as the Terminator trying to kill her. That's true, he allows, but she changes. As she perceives the threat from the Terminator, she genuinely begins to fall in love with her husband. Robinson tried to inject a certain feeling into Terminator One Shot. Do you remember the movie Blood Simple, he asks. It was a film where you never knew what people were thinking, or what motivations drove them. There were plot twists upon twists. That's what I tried to do, combine Blood Simple with Terminator. By contrast, he describes Terminator's secondary objectives as a very simple plot. Simple, that is, if you recall the first Dark Horse series, since secondary objectives carries forward that storyline.
Solicitation copy reads as follows. This beautifully illustrated 48-page trade paperback spotlights writer James Robinson, who delivers a compelling and action-packed script which plays to Matt Wagner's atmospheric and visually stunning renderings. Unknowingly, Kyle Reese went back in time to protect Sarah Connor from the second of 2 Terminators sent from the future to alter the past. In this one-shot special, we encounter the very first Terminator to be sent back through time, a female version of the 800 model, but just as deadly, if not more so. Her mission: to kill John Connor's mother. The Sarah Connor that she finds has a mission of her own, to kill her new husband and take off with his vast wealth before ever having a baby. Following an ominous shot of the Golden Gate Bridge in deep fog, the comic begins with a 1-page recap of key elements of the first movie relevant to this story.
Once upon tomorrow, a war raged. Both sides fought long, both sides fought hard. One side lived and bled and breathed. The other side didn't. But now, this war is almost a postscript. The humans, led by John Connor, storm the machine master control. Victory, ultimate victory, seems within sight. The humans breach Master Control's inner sanctum, just in time to see an 800 model Terminator vanish before their eyes.
A female T-800 model is sent to 1984 Los Angeles, kills a homeless person that witnessed her arrival, then moves on to a gun store dealer who carries fully automatic assault weapons.
The cyborg that Reese encountered used a page from a phone book to locate John Connor's mother. The other Terminator, the first one, went a different route. In the gun shop, where it would find weaponry and clothing, it used the store's computer modem and its own advanced knowledge of computer hardware to access the telephone company's records, up to the minute records. The latest edition of the phone book was printed a month ago. Sarah Lang and John Connor have been married for 13 days.
This is an important distinction, because the newlywed husband is only called John on a single splash page, and for the rest of the issue is called Michael. Probably, the licensor objected to the use of the John Connor name for a different character, but it seems to me that the T-800 probably drove all night to San Francisco on the computer equivalent of a hunch that Sarah and John Connor conceived a John Jr. Later in the book, It kills 3 people in a Rolodex of names of people associated with Sarah Lang that were also based in that city in 30 minutes or less, or otherwise in about the time it would take for a pizza delivery that was supposed to take place before the Terminatrix's arrival. Sarah Lang was also the 4th Sarah Connor in phone records, according to the story. Do the math. Another thing that's interesting is that while the story starts before the first Terminator movie, the killing sprees of both T-800 units begin on the same night. I still haven't rewatched the first movie since starting this podcast, but my recollection is that the Arnold Schwarzenegger model doesn't locate the correct Sarah Connor, as well as Kyle Reese, until its second night in 1984. The first night, it's gathering supplies, then the next day kills his first Sarah Connor, and arrives at Tech Noir the following night. So the stated chronology of this story is an obvious direct conflict with a popular movie readily available to rent or own in 1991. The tree was already poisoned before the comics even butted heads with T2, and its tainted seeds are being planted for the resolution of Robinson's run on the property the following year. Another issue is that the Terminatrix steals a car and drives the near 400 miles between cities at just under 100 miles per hour. Again, do the math and tell me how half the first movie fits into that time span, or why the trip starts on one night, moves into the next day, but the Terminatrix doesn't locate Sarah Lang until the next night. Anyway, we're not even going to meet Sarah until page 10.
Yeah, the doctor says it's nothing, but yeah, I'm going to get a second opinion.
Hey, that's my coffee. You're drinking my coffee. You see that?
I don't believe it. She's accelerating.
Get ahead of her. Cut her off. She just landed herself in trouble. Big trouble.
The next morning, retired African-American police officer Ellis Ruggles visits his old station with his pet monkey and finds out about the massacre at the 53rd Precinct, with Kyle Reese the only suspect. In the movie, it's the West Highland Police Station, but maybe they also have precinct names? So Ruggs and Peanut go back to his house to collect a rifle bag and go back to work. There is a sense that Ruggs is either separated or divorced from his beloved wife, or he could be a widower, or maybe she's just at work. The story establishes Ruggles at about 51 years old, so unless he's got serious disability or pension payments coming in, someone has to pay the bills.
Good morning, Mrs. Connor.
Good morning, Mr. Connor.
God, Sarah, I love you.
In San Francisco, Michael Connor goes out for a beer, but really he's contemplating the conflict between his starving artist pretensions and his rejection of the big money gallery owner Sarah represents. The twist is that Michael actually came from money and possesses a sizable inheritance that he refuses to touch. Sarah is actually broke, but she knows through unrevealed means about Michael's secret windfall. Her actual lover, artist Alex, concocted the plot for Sarah to marry Michael so that Alex could murder him on their honeymoon to collect on his fortune. This is explained in 2 long, painfully inorganic exposition dumps. That evening, the T-800 locates Sarah Lang in a hotel hallway, and then kills everybody but her in a chase down the elevator shaft, through the lobby, and onto the street. Sarah catches the fastest moving elevator and taxi in the human experience to reach out to Alex, who notes on her arrival that he'd only just ordered that pizza, and later mistakes the T-800 as delivering something other than his swift demise. Sarah uses a blowtorch that Alex had been using to sculpt art to burn the T-800's face off, then drops the heavy sculpture on it, and finally blows up Alex's loft with the gas. Obviously, this barely slows the Terminator. Meanwhile, Ellis Ruggles and Peanut, which sounds like a ventriloquist act on the Dick Cavett show, have reached San Fran, met up with Michael Connor at the hotel, and soon manages to locate Sarah and the T-800 during a high-speed chase in a city of nearly 3 million people in a time before mobile phones or GPS tracking. Which reminds me, I guess part of what held up that batch of Terminators in the previous miniseries was installing Bluetooth technology, since there's no indication that the 2 active T-800s at this time are in contact with one another. This entire episode would have been averted if Arnie had just said, "Oh, I've located the real Sarah Connor. You'd better come back." in case Kyle Reese blows me in half with a stick of dynamite, and she crushes me in a press before I can choke her to death in my vice grip that has already ripped through a dude's rib cage in one motion. Ruggles only has one shot with his electromech phaser energy rifle, built from parts he smuggled inside his body when John Connor sent him back from the future to the year 1955.
Are there others like you? Sleepers?
The last of the 800 models were counterattacking as Connor thought to send me back. He didn't have much time to plan. I know he was going to destroy the time machine, leave nothing to chance. But there was one other volunteer, Corporal Graves, sent back to 1965.
And?
In 1955, I materialized in a field in Glendale. 10 years later, they built a freeway through it. Graves lasted 5 seconds. He was hit by a produce truck.
Ruggles struggled against racial oppression non-existent in his previous Man vs. Machines times, and might have given up, if not for the abiding love and support of Betty. But also, he was watching over the real Sarah Connor throughout her life, only clocking out once he saw Kyle Reese make the scene, and seemingly doing nothing to help him. I dunno, maybe Kyle living out the rest of the week would have done that bleak future some good, and even though he's retired from both jobs and knows Sarah Lane will probably die by 1997, he couldn't just let her be hunted down like all the other dead ladies in LA named Sarah Connor. But the T-800 was too far out of range, so he blew his one shot to fully disable it, only temporarily knocking out part of its functions.
The mech could be anywhere on any road, waiting to find us and strike again.
So what are we gonna do? Chance it? Make a break for the freeway?
No, not quite. I've always had one with me. An animal. They can sense mechs somehow. Before Peanut, I had 2 dogs and a tame fox.
So the trio go out for Chinese and catch a ferry, waiting for the Terminatrix to strike again. It flies a helicopter into the ferry, eventually sinking it and killing at minimum dozens of innocents not named Sarah Connor. Ruggles is gut shot and falls off the boat, but despite everything, gets off a second one shot to take out the T-800. Sort of. You see, the circumstances had removed all doubts in the minds of Michael and Sarah about their love for one another, until the T-800 returned, and Sarah changed her mind. She needed some kind of certainty, despite the Terminator disabled at her feet, Michael offering all his money to her, and the guy who'd saved her life and given her a gun sinking lifelessly into the bay with his last thought for Betty. Except surprise, the Terminator has enough life left to grab her ankle, slide off the side of the capsizing ferry, and drag Sarah to her doom in those same depths. Michael somehow held her and the dead weight of a T-800 endoskeleton for a moment, wondering if Sarah had merely slipped from his grasp or let go to save his life. Because Michael is still in denial, and the James Robinson that wrote Cry for Justice was always in there. Oh, and the only sympathetic character, Peanut the monkey, rode back in with Michael on a life preserver.
Oh, Sarah.
Excerpt from the October 1991 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 195 from the reviews section. Terminator One Shot, rated by Jeffrey Lang. You have to hand it to Dark Horse. They know the difference between personal expression and product, and they don't have any problem finding space on the schedule for both of them. Case in point, the product is called Terminator One Shot, and there's one really good reason to buy it. No, I'm not talking about the goofy 3D pop-up, though that was a scream. This was one of the few chances we've had in recent years to watch Matt Wagner really jam. Think about it. What was the last time? I'm not talking about those couple of issues of Grindel back in the middle of the run, the Harvey Kurtzman stuff, but real rock'em sock'em gun-totin', funny book lacerations and contusions. If you've seen the first Terminator movie, the one where Arnold's the baddie, then you already know pretty much everything that's going to happen. Okay, so this time the cyborg is skinned out in female anatomy, the victim is a self-absorbed little snit, and the hero is middle-aged instead of young and hunky. So what? The conflict is essentially the same except that, emotionally, there's nothing riding on any of this. It has the same basic, visceral appeal as good porn. Motion, 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 bang. Everyone has a cigarette. But Wagner has fun. He mentioned in the credits that he's darn proud of the nigh impossible pace at which he created the art for this book. And it looks like that too. Every line looks like it was slapped down without a moment's consideration. Nothing was wasted. Motion, 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 bang. So what if it's all in the service of a piece of product? Wagner's paid his dues, even if you only count the stuff that's gone down with Batman Grindel. So be nice. Pick up a copy of the Terminator One Shot. Bang, bang, shoot, shoot. Grade 3.5 stars.
Excerpt from Ian Keel's review in the Slings and Arrows graphic novel guide. The second Dark Horse Terminator outing has never been accorded an official title, still referred to as the one-shot, almost 25 years since publication. At 50 pages of a complete story, it's certainly a graphic novel by European standards, and James Robinson's work has a greater density than the previous story. Matt Wagner's painted art on this second story is remarkable, very different from his usual style, and if anything slightly impressionistic, as his characters are almost always in motion. Robinson also aims for a widescreen event and plots the spectacle well, but the descriptive style he employs to tell the story slows it down in places. It also leads to crowded pages with multiple talking heads as Wagner cramps the dialogue in to compensate for the space elsewhere. It was early in Robinson's career, and as such still reads well, climaxing with an almost biblical reckoning of the balance sheet.
So yeah, let's talk about Terminator One-Shot if you want. I think Matt Wagner was a name that was kind of like an indie darling, so I don't know if he was the biggest name, but he was, someone with a lot of cred, and James Robinson was probably someone who they knew would have a lot of cred soon. But I mean, the superpower that he brought to that book is really characterization. Like, everyone gets characterization, and it's not like the characterization where we'll give you characterization for this character because they're about to die. We'll give you characterization for every single person. And, that's even worse in secondary objectives. I think that miniseries has, you don't know who's the main character or not, but because everyone gets the same liberal dose of who they are and what they're about.
And I assume Wagner had already worked with Robinson, not directly, but Robinson was doing work for him on Grindel projects that were to come. And I don't know if they had met through in the Kamiko days, or if they were introduced to one another through Dark Horse, or maybe even through Goodwin. But it was an odd pairing, because how often does Matt Wagner draw for another person? To me, he's always
not very often.
Artist Matt Wagner. So I wonder if it was a situation where he's seeing what Robinson's doing with people within the Grindel sphere and was looking for an opportunity to do something with this guy, get to read his scripts and try to interpret the way he's telling stories, because the way he was approaching comic books in that time period was really rather unique. Yeah,
his story was Four Devils, One Hell. That was the Grendel's tale. And I believe that was in the can for a long time before it got released, like years. So as far as the impact on his career, I think Matt Wagner had definitely worked with him before they did Terminator, but the public hadn't seen it.
Do you know anything about this cover? Because I can't find any kind of credits, and to me, it doesn't look like a painting. It looks like mixed media to me. Am I just being fooled by the level of detail?
It looks like AI, doesn't it? I have no idea about the cover. It doesn't seem to match what's on the inside, and I don't know why. The back cover definitely looks like Wagner work, but not sure about the front one. And I mean, the naming of it, calling it One Shot, because it never actually is called One Shot on the front or the spine or the back. So
it's almost like a White Album situation where we just all call it One Shot. I think it was solicited as Terminator One Shot, which is not an uncommon thing for a one-off book to be called. But I think maybe the novelty of a book about a Terminator being called One Shot, maybe it just has this thing where we know it by reputation, right, whether or not they ever explicitly call it that.
Yeah, I mean, and it becomes a plot point because the sleeper agent who was sent back to the 50s, who activates when the Terminator's on, another one of Connor's men, he has one shot in his weapon to take down the Terminator. So that becomes an important plot point towards the end.
Well, and it's also funny that they find a twist on things, and that's something that you always enjoy with a writer, is there's that tendency where it's like, oh, dogs. Dogs bark at Terminators. Let's always have dogs and things. And I like that, I've had a fox, I'm carrying this monkey with me right now. Dogs aren't always practical. We're going to do something a little different. I like that little tweak on things.
Yeah. Let's not rehash what's gone before. What if there's a Sarah Connor being hunted and she's a piece of
stuff?
That's she's murderous. She's about to betray and have her husband killed to inherit money. But it's just, there's all this going on, which is a really good twist in it, because you're used to an unimaginative writer would say, all right, Terminator's after someone, how are they going to escape? Whereas this one, this person doesn't really deserve to live. Yeah, there's some really good action around it, and I think it's the first time I saw Terminators involved with water as an aspect. Like, they're very, very heavy, and if they fall into water, they just sink straight away. So, that sort of thing hadn't really been played with. And rereading it now, I was just struck by yeah, there's all this characterization, but there's also an abundance of action that Matt Wagner is able to draw because he doesn't take the same approach that a literal artist like Gulacy takes, where, you know, you tell Gulacy a helicopter smashes into the ship. Gulacy has to draw every part of that, whereas Matt Wagner will give you the feel of it rather than every single image to do with it.
One thing that I dug about the book is how 80s it is.
It's so 80s.
Yeah, because you've got this mingling of styles. We had the Bronze Age, where you literally had how to draw comics the Marvel way, and there's a whole generation of artists that how many heads high, Buscema-like proportions, you know, and musculature and things like that. And I think part of what made Wagner so refreshing was that he's bringing in all these actual art movement takes to the comic book page. And there's so much, you know, the Art Deco in particular that he's known for, and applying that to something as macho 80s as the Terminator, just the juxtaposition of these disparate elements, bold in a way that we got away from after the 80s. But in the 80s, there was like this desire to smash the square peg into the circle and make it go through one way or another, kind of marvel at what it looks like on the other side once it passes through.
And this is a bonkers piece of comic because it has a fold-out pop-out page in the middle of it, which is basically to provide extra impact to the Terminator jumping over a row of cops and firing a machine gun. And it's so unnecessary and it's so over the top, and it would have made producing the book so much more expensive. But it's just there because it's the 80s.
Yeah, and my brother bought a copy of this one. This was probably the first Terminator comic I ever went through. And I remember, you know, you're flipping through the book and the paper stock changes throughout the book because you have to have a rigid enough stock for you to be able to open up that centerfold and have the motorcycle riding Terminatrix pop out at you. And I remember looking at that going, oh, this is a Hallmark card. My brother paid this premium price for a stinking Hallmark card. And you can see that maybe I don't know if it was a production issue or if it just didn't sell glow-in-the-dark green Ghost Rider cover numbers, but they didn't really try this very often after this. So I think it was just more trouble than it was worth for such a gimmicky element. And I do like that in later printings, they just go ahead and fill out the background. You get to see the purple hues that Wagner painted. I just like it better that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like they're embarrassed by it after they had, you know, were about to release it, because I don't remember it being a feature of the promotion particularly. If they were coming into the 90s, there's all sorts of things you can do to a cover, and they don't really do anything to the cover. It's just plain. So
there's a lot of dialogue. And again, you might have situations like what happens in some of the other books that Robinson writes, where they just do a couple of drawings and then just insert the dialogue and turn it into like a novella for a page or so. And what I like with Wagner is he's like, not a heck with that. I'm going to draw 16 or 20 some odd panels on this page, and we're going to go back and forth, and they're going to be looking in different areas each time. And I just like that he's taking what's a very novelistic approach by Robinson. That I love that so many comic book writers these days are clearly wanting to be screenwriters, and they keep trying to write a comic book as though it were a movie. And I think that gives it an insubstantial quality because the pacing, especially that manga style decompressed pacing, you just don't get a lot of story when you go that route. And also there's not a lot of internal monologue. There's not a lot of thought. Everything is dialogue and action, and that has to carry the day. And one of the things that I find so refreshing going back to this James Robinson stuff decades after the fact is he really does feel like a novelist who's being adapted to comic books, but he's also aware of the cinematic qualities of the Terminator. So you get these passages that are like essentially a book. It's prose that they're finding ways to adapt to a comic book, but then he can shift gears and you can do that very cinematic, high action, lots of different movements per panel, lots of panels to express those movements. So it's very cinematic, but both ways they're making use of the comic book. They're doing things that may work in a book or in a movie, but they're making it work for the comic book and adapting it to the comic book medium. So they're creating something new, something that's infused with that flavor, but it's still a comic book at heart. And that's very exciting to see. And I feel like we lost something when we stopped trying to challenge ourselves with that kind of mingling of styles.
Yeah, and there's something also in this work that is around in Robinson's earlier stuff, and that is the feeling of an outsider coming to parts of America and going, this is really cool, I love it, and this is why. So, I mean, this one is set, I think it's set in Pasadena, which is where he was actually living at the time. So, and he obviously thought Pasadena was the best place in the world from the way he describes it in his comics. And the same thing happened in Firearm, and it happens in other Terminator books as well, where he's really putting it in a place and then giving the outsider view of that place that's a real place. So
yeah, we're driving through San Francisco, so we got to go over the bridge. We got to take advantage of the hills. It's very cool. Like you said, he's getting to experience different weather and different environments and stuff that he hasn't seen before, and really relishing it. So it's story and it's travelogue.
Yeah. So it's a really neat little package, and I think it's better than I first thought it was the first time I read it. But reading it now, it really brings back to me all the feeling of getting into comics in the 80s through things like Dark Knight Returns, and that was the launching pad that launches books like this, and the fact that you have these stories that are really cool. They have characters mixed up in them who have horrible things happen to them or don't. There's a very much I don't think it could exist without Dark Knight Returns. Maybe that's just the approach of the trajectory of my comics reading path.
Yeah, well, I think that's certainly that being commercially viable, I think, is true. When I look at the Matt Wagner work here, I'm thinking more like Art Spiegelman and with Raw and all those boundary pushing works of the early 80s, that sort of punk rock mentality being applied to comic books. What's incredible about it is this is the kind of thing that would have been niche a few years earlier, but because of the doors opened up by things like mostly Frank Miller stuff, Dark Knight Returns, Electro Assassin with Bill Sienkiewicz, this was commercially viable in a way that it wouldn't be before or really since. Like at some point in the early 90s, everybody had to be an Image person, and this wouldn't have flown in 92, 93. It sort of came out at the exact time that it could be released and make somebody some money instead of losing them a bunch of money.
Yeah, I mean, it's a respectable, incredible, arty prospect that they made from Dark Horse. So, which, fits into where they were trying. Like, they weren't just trying to be just comics. They wanted to be comics that were art, some sort of value to them apart from the financial.
Having been complimentary about the book overall, I will say, though, I do feel like they're just taking a noir story and trying to shoehorn it into Terminator. And at times it's a bit clunky, particularly when Sarah Connor goes to meet with her lover after she's been initially attacked by the Terminatrix, and they're trying to go through all that dialogue explaining the plot to get the money from the guy who's refused the money, and she's had these bad deals, and just like the exposition there is really heavy and really heavy-handed. Yes. And there's a lot of elements that are shoehorned in to just kind of make it work. So I do see the rookie mistakes, trying to find your way from prose to this. Some of it works better than others, but I think it still works overall. It's still a good action story. As far as art goes, it's really interesting to look at. I don't think it entirely works, but I really appreciate the effort to try to make it work. And there's some really striking visuals, particularly, as you mentioned, when the Terminatrix and Sarah Connor are sinking to the bottom of the bay.
And to me, it's charming. Even though, it is clunky, the exposition is too much. There's a charm to his early work that deserted him in his later career, I think, that you love the earnestness of it, even if you could see that it could be done better. I know some people who read Starman and The Shade and just can't handle the voice. They just think it's of a time that they don't like. But, to me, seeing it evolve in real time, it was just so delightful. And his books were always a delight to read. Just the characterization, I guess the luxury of the way he plotted and the floridness of his, captioning and third person and then first person and diaries and all that sort of stuff. There's no other writer who I'm happy to dive into a text piece as much as James Robinson, because he's worth a read. And I'm amazed a man like this has never written a novel. So But right. Yeah, there we are.
One thing I did manage to carry over from the Alien show, since so little of what I thought was going to be a proven formula made it onto this show, it's just a different beast. But I do like to try to do the art spotlight. If you could only pick one page from this comic book to have for your own, which page would that be?
Oh, I don't think, you're lucky I got it in front of me. I prefer this one to Gulacy stuff, that's for sure. It's to be a splash page at the time. I'd say page 4, which is the splash page of the Terminatrix coming out of the ammo store with all the weapons and the gun belts and the body behind her.
That's one thing that I find very funny is as many ways in which he's trying to subvert the formula across his several Terminator stories. 2 out of the 3 has to have the moment right out of the first movie where the Terminator goes to a gun shop, collects their arms, and kills the gun shop owner each time. And I think it even happens in Endgame. It's like he's got to have that one moment. It's not a Terminator store if we don't kill the gun shop owner.
Yeah, clothing and weapons. They're always fun part of the plot.
I was looking at all the different artwork, and there's so many interesting action beats and such, but ultimately I just ended up on page 1. I like the look of the bridge. I like how abstract it is. You kind of have to look at it for a little bit to even see what you're seeing. I like that Art Deco quality it has to it, and I just think it would look really cool on a wall. I'd probably want to have up the bay on a foggy morning or in the evening time, whichever. It just looks cool to me.
Yeah, it's a nice one and very abstractish.
Excerpt from the July 1991 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 192. The Newsline section offers comics bestsellers. All figures from the June 1991 Capital City Internal Correspondence newsletter. Figures represent direct market retail orders. Top 10 comics in total dollars. The comics with the highest orders in terms of dollars spent. Number 1, X-Force number 1. Number 2, Spider-Man number 13. Number 3, Infinity Gauntlet number 2. Number 4, Uncanny X-Men Annual number 15. Number 5, Punisher POV number 2. 6, X-Factor Annual number 6. 7, Uncanny X-Men number 279. 8, Wolverine number 43. 9, the Terminator One-Shot. And 10, Wolverine number 44. Unsurprisingly, Terminator One-Shot did not crack the top 10 for circulation. But for top 10 independent comics in dollars, the rankings were, in first place, Terminator One-Shot, followed by Predator Big Game number 4, Dragonfly number 3, The Spider number 2, Beauty and the Beast Silent Echoes, Vampire Losot number 12, Silent Mobius number 1, Magnus Robot Fighter number 4, Quantum Leap number 1, and Solar Man of the Atom number 1. The top 10 independent comics in circulation saw Predator Big Game number 4 overcome Terminator One-Shot, followed by Magnus Robot Fighter, Solar Man of the Atom, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Adventures number 24, Vampire Lestat, Quantum Leap, Faust number 8, Lost in Space number 3, and Concrete Fragile Creature number 2. These successes helped to power Dark Horse to the number 3 slot in top publishers market share at 3.25%, behind Marvel's 57.4%, and DC's 22.27%, but ahead of Malibu / Adventure / Aircell / Eternity's 1.58%, roughly twice as much in fact. Walt Disney in 5th place, Innovation in 6th, Eclipse in 7th, Fantagraphics in 8th, Graffiti in 9th, and First Comics in 10th. And just in case you're curious, the top 10 black and whites in circulation were Faust number 8, Dark Horse Presents number 51, No Guts or Glory, Lone Wolf and Cub number 47, Cerebus number 147, Brat Pack number 5, Venus Wars number 3, Robotech Sentinels number 4, Xenophile number 5, and Birdland number 3.
The Terminator One-Shot is so named on the title page of the special, as well as the indicia on the same page. It is among the most reprinted Terminator stories, appearing in 2004's The Terminator, rewired trade paperback from iBooks, 2008's Terminator Omnibus Volume 1, and 2017's The Terminator. The original comic series, Tempest, and One-Shot hardcover from Dark Horse. It has also been announced as the first story collected in Dynamite Entertainment's The Terminator 40th Anniversary graphic novel collections, a crowdfunding effort that raised almost 10 times its original ask for the 3-volume hardcover set. As you heard earlier, the story was also adapted in 2005 under the title The Other Sarah Connor as part of an Eagle One Media digital comic DVD.
Excerpt from the February 1991 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 188. Newsline, Dark Horse adapts Aliens 3. The latest Terminator series, titled Secondary Objectives, will begin shipping in June. The 4-issue monthly color series will be written by James Robinson and illustrated by Paul Gulacy. This series picks up where the last one left off, with the remaining heroes trying to prevent the remaining Terminator from completing its secondary objective, the death of Sarah Connor. But though they don't know it yet, another Terminator has arrived on the scene. This first issue will cost $2.50. Excerpt from the September 1991 cover dated Comic Scene Spectacular number 5, Terminal Consequences by Eric Niederost. In the previous Terminator miniseries, a team of humans from the future, the ones battling the Terminators, time trip to the past to prevent the Terminator technology from ever being developed. Aware of what was afoot, 4 Terminators also came back in time to stop the team from realizing its objective. With machine guns ceased chattering, and the explosive smoke cleared the last panels, the Terminators were apparently destroyed, and the humans achieved their victory at a heavy cost. Of the human rebel team, recounts Robinson, only Mary the leader is still alive, and Aston, the research scientist, is still around, as well as one cyborg, a member of the original Terminator team. You'll recall he became a good guy at the first series end, and he betrayed the other Terminators. Save for the one turncoat, the Terminators are wiped out, aren't they? Well, Robinson confides, one of those Terminators blew up while falling off a bridge. In my series, we discover that he, or it, has survived. This Terminator, C890.I, reprograms himself. He's not fighting human rebels anymore. He has switched to his secondary objectives, the death of Sarah Connor and her young son, John Connor. His objectives are discovered by Mary and the Cyborg. Sarah Connor's in Mexico, so the Terminator travels south on a motorbike. Mary and the Cyborg fly down to Mexico, get there ahead of him, and wait to do battle to protect Sarah. Then the plot thickens, or maybe deepens. About the same time as the first series, Robinson elaborates, Another Terminator was being incubated to be sent back to the past. It's a female, and she should have arrived at the same moment as the Terminator team from the first series, since the time setting is fixed. A spatial mishap occurs, and she arrives in the middle of the ocean. So during the first series, this Terminator is on the seafloor, groping toward shore. Terminator meets the abyss? Not quite. When the female Terminator finally hits the beach from her underwater odyssey, she's arrived too late, and so must make up for lost time. Eventually, she too heads for Mexico to join the other characters. Readers are bound to compare Robinson's series with the one penned by John Arcudi. And speaking of Arcudi's Terminator, Robinson observes, the first series was very action-oriented too. After all, it's about Terminators. But one of the things that I tried to do was to bring out the characters' humanity to juxtapose them with the cold, unfeeling, machine-like nature of the Terminators. I'm playing one off against the other. Robinson didn't have to worry about any movie characters intruding into his script. There will be no cameos by the Schwarzenegger Terminator, nor by Kyle Reese, Michael Biehn, or new characters seen in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, licensed by Marvel and forthcoming as a separate comic. As for Sarah Connor, her presence is very much felt in the books, though she doesn't actually appear. As to why he believes the Terminator stories are so successful on both screen and page, Robinson sounds pensive. The main thing, he opines, is man versus machine. There are human beings, thinking, feeling, emotional human beings, against cold, hard, logical machines, who are unrelenting and can't be hurt. In short, the Terminators are inhuman, or unhuman. The stories illustrate the perfect battle between polar opposites. The original Terminator film works on that level. It's also a very simple plot, if you think about it. The script stresses the humanity of Sarah and Kyle. They fall in love, go through suffering, yet overcome all obstacles. I think that's why the movie was such a success, and those elements have been carried over into the comic. Robinson says he has been given a free hand in his Terminator scripts, and I haven't given Terminator 2 Judgment Day any thought. My storylines are entirely different and have no connection to the movie. Terminator's secondary objectives won't wrap up any loose ends of the narrative weave, or bring the Dark Horse series any kind of conclusion. Apparently, there will be characters who survive to continue the storyline if Dark Horse so chooses. Actually, Robinson confides, Dark Horse will have a third series. It's already on the drawing board. As far as I know, the third series writer will be Ian Edgington, another British writer. Whatever plot points I've established, he will carry forward, just as I carry forward the plot points that John Arcudi set down. Does that rule out Robinson's ever penning another Terminator story? Well, he hedges. If I came up with another great idea, I would be interested in doing more. I must admit, I don't have anything at the moment. Besides, I've just done 2 virtually back-to-back. With these things, it doesn't work unless you can give 100% of yourself. And I just don't have any ideas, fresh ideas, at the moment. James Robinson has come a long way, literally and figuratively, since he first took up his pen to write. I started in the business, Robinson recalls, by writing a graphic novel in England titled London's Dark. That brought me to the attention of Archie Goodwin and Matt Wagner. Matt offered me Grendel Tales, which I wrote, and that brought me to the attention of Grendel's editor, Diana Schutz. She recommended me for Terminator's secondary objectives. In the 2 years since he first landed on these shores from Britain, Robinson has managed to keep occupied. As if to anchor his newfound American roots, he has married an American. I'm settled and very happy here, he declares. Besides the Terminator books, he adapted Faust for First Comics' Classics Illustrated. Now, with Terminator finished, Robinson has moved on to other work. At the moment, he explains, I'm doing a prestige series for DC Comics called The Golden Age. It's about all the old classic DC characters, superheroes like Green Lantern. I'm also involved with some other projects. For example, I'm doing a graphic novel for Epic called 67 Seconds, so I'm very busy lining up things. It's a way of keeping a high profile. James Robinson hopes that Terminator One-Shot and Terminator's secondary objectives will succeed. He has given the 2 Terminator tales his best shot, but ultimately, as he puts it, that's for the public to decide.
Mike's reports Terminator. Secondary Objectives Number 1 was released on July 2nd, 1991, based on another DHP house ad that would place it on the exact same day that Marvel Comics put out their one-shot adaptation of Terminator 2, Judgment Day. It wasn't dirty pull on their part, as the actual movie was released at the same time, and everyone was just riding its wave. Marvel also took on Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, while at DC, Adam Hughes covered Star Trek, The Next Generation, The Madala Imperative. Archie Comics began 3 issues of Cushkins. Harvey took on the 9 Lives of Felix the Cat. Malibu's Planet of the Apes held its first annual. And Valiant produced the initial issues of Super Mario Bros. And World Wrestling Federation Battlemania. Solicitation copy reads, continuing the time-traveling saga, Terminator. Secondary Objectives picks up where the first Dark Horse Terminator series left off as the remnants of our band of heroes try to prevent the remaining Terminator from completing his secondary objective, the death of Sarah Connor. Unbeknownst to all, a brand new Terminator has arrived on the scene to complicate matters even more. Welcome to tomorrow, 39 years after today. Math time again. Kyle Reese travels back to 1984 from the future year 2029. That's also the established date given at the start of the Tempest miniseries, and this story starts 47 hours after those 3 Terminators time traveled. The late-birth female Terminator is sent back to the same date and time time, but not space, as she materializes 354 miles off the California coastline at dawn. That in itself is an issue, because the other Terminators arrived at night, and the rotation of the Earth would make the Terminatrix further from the sun, not closer. That's nitpicking though. The important part is that this story is set in 1990, or charitably over New Year's to flip the dates to 2030 and 1991. That won't matter for this episode, but tuck that factoid into the back of your mind to recall in a few months. Z000.M will hereafter be referred to as the Terminatrix, but not the same from the one-shot. Despite one ending her story at the bottom of a large body of water near California and the other starting hers there. But also, the second one is drawn with a lot of barely concealed nudity by Paul Gulacy, so you can easily tell them apart. This one is a svelte brown-haired girl, where the other two were a beefy strawberry blonde and a ripped brunette of indeterminate ethnicity. It takes her roughly 21 days to walk from the seafloor to Los Angeles. The trio of survivors from Tempest are still holed up in a Pasadena dive. Mary thinks about how she was told that she had a second name when she was 8, but that person then died in battle, and she's since forgotten it. Presumably a middle name, because she was repeatedly identified as Mary Randall last time, though she certainly doesn't look the same. Gulacy draws a lovely white lady face, but like a lot of artists, it's mostly modest variations on just the one. Dr. Ed Aston is slightly less of a Clark Kent type, but he's in a depression over his future prospects and drinking, so maybe he's dropped weight. The rebel cyborg I-825.M is also slightly more handsome, because Gulacy can't help himself, but the jagged webbed facial scar makes him easy to identify. I-825.M is still struggling with his programming, which insists that he murder his companions and resume the mission. The white guy Terminator from the first miniseries, C-890.L, hereafter simply the Terminator, had survived its fall off a bridge, but spent weeks recovering. Then it raided a gang's arms cache, leading to a firefight with a reported 39 officers' lives lost, then adding the reporter that was reporting on them. But then the Terminator proceeds to kill many more cops and civilians, with Robinson giddily describing their last actions and bloody ends. Plainclothes Detective Mark Sloan is also on the scene and sees the last of the Terminator's skin burned off. He's motivated to act when the life of a patrolman who had once saved his own was imperiled. The Terminator is conserving ammunition, and so avoids shooting the unarmed Sloan, but soon the detective comes back at him with a police car. Despite taking a tumble, the Terminator uses a grenade to cover its escape. Later, it takes out a biker and dons his leathers to conceal its exposed endoskeleton. He looked more than a bit like the current fan favorite Ghost Rider, probably by design. The rebels watched it all on the TV news, and Mary's brief contentment curdles at the realization that this isn't over. I-825.M, who I promise gets a proper name soon, points out that the Terminators are no longer pursuing the rebels. That's seen as a stalemate. They will revert to secondary objectives, the deaths of Sarah and John Connor.
Excerpt from the August 1991 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 193. Newsline. Comics bestsellers. All figures are from the July 1991 Capital City Internal Correspondence Newsletter. The top 10 independent comics in dollars were number 1, Terminator Secondary Objectives number 1, second place, Rocketeer Adventure Magazine number 3, then Grateful Dead Comics number 1, Interview with the Vampire number 1, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis number 3, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 38, Robin Hood number 1, this is the Eclipse series, Tim Truman wrote it I believe, Green Hornet number 1, Lone Wolf and Cub number 48, and Magnus Robot Fighter number 5. The top 10 independent comics in circulations were mostly the same. Terminator Secondary Objectives number 1 was still on top. Some of the pricier books traded places with some of the less pricey ones. And coming in at the tail end were Solar Man of the Atom number 3 and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Adventures number 25. Dark Horse continued to be the third place publisher with 3.69% of the market, followed by Harry N. Abrams, Malibu, Innovation, Comic Images, Fantagraphics, Gerber, and Walt Disney. And in case you're curious about the top 10 black and whites in circulation, that would be topped by Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 38, The Tick number 10, Savage Sword of Conan number 189, Dark Horse Presents number 52, Cherry number 12, Paul the Samurai number 3, Lone Wolf and Cub number 48, Cerebus number 148, Love and Rockets number 36, and Usagi Yojimbo number 30.
So we're talking about the others?
Yes. Again, going into secondary objectives, do you recall picking this up as floppies? Do you think you got them as back issues?
I got it as floppies, and I think several of them are out by the time I got onto them, but I was able to get them all off the shelf. And I think I bought the fourth one new off the shelf.
This one's important to me because I'm entering my fourth year talking about Aliens comics, and the actual number of Aliens comics I bought are very slight ones that I actually pre-ordered or bought off the shelves in the time period versus all the stuff that I've read decades down the line. Same is pretty much true with Terminator. The only Terminator series that I bought in full, off the shelves, brand new, was Terminator Secondary Objectives.
Yeah. And rereading it now, I realized there is some continuity from another miniseries that I'd missed out on.
Yeah, that was very frustrating for me because buying this, especially after having looked at my brother's copy of the one-shot, that's a very introductory story. It literally, you don't need to read anything else because it's essentially a sequel to the first Terminator movie. You know, everything is already there for you if you've seen the movie, and even if you haven't seen it, you can kind of pick up from it. Or this one, you've got a slew of characters that you've not seen before in media, but was introduced in the first miniseries, and there's a lot of carryover elements, and I felt a little put off a little bit when I was buying it because it was so clear to me that I'd missed something, and wanting to just reach back and read that material before I read this instead of feeling like I was coming in late to the party. And that was something I struggled with for each of the issues that I bought.
Yeah, I think I had that feeling, but I was carried over because I was such a James Robinson fan that I was there for him. So this was his take on stuff, but it might have been set up by someone else, but this was his take on it. So that was enough for me, I think.
So one thing I do have to compliment the Wachowskis on is that it makes a lot more sense for me to have a being inside of something that looks like a liquid, a clear liquid, embryonic fluid, something like that. When I look at these Terminators coming out of what appears to be vats of blood, while it's a very striking image, it kind of is sticky. And maybe it's not supposed to be blood, maybe it's just a fluid that resembles blood, but it does kind of make me think that they'd be a mess coming out of those vats with all that gooey red coming off of them.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. I did appreciate, though, that you didn't see the usual, I guess we've seen it in so many movies, the future version where it's just ominous dark sky, laser flashes and skulls and all that sort of stuff. It got away from that a bit, which was nice.
Being a Gulacy book, they make sure to give us a mostly naked woman for a few pages there because that's part of what is going to bring people to a Gulacy book, let's be honest.
Yeah. But I find it's not good naked. It's a bit like the Seinfeld episode where there's some things a woman shouldn't be doing if you want to look good naked, and being drawn by Paul Gulacy is one of them, I'd say.
I love Paul Gulacy, so it's going to be fun because we're going to go back and forth on this one. I enjoyed the female form falling from the midst of the sky because the coordinates were wrong, and again, you've got a heavy Terminator falling into the water. It almost feels like a continuation of the one shot without burdening it with that continuity, but I do like when even Skynet messes up and plops its Terminator in the middle of water that it's going to have to walk back to the shore to compensate for.
Yeah, the plummeting it's a good look. I'm struck by how much writing there is on the front of this book. The first few pages are just essays, aren't they?
Well, like you get to page 5 where they're reintroducing the surviving characters. Reading this miniseries, I felt like I'd missed a lot. And I didn't realize this is literally issue 5. You had the 4-issue miniseries. This picks up right from the end of the first miniseries, but you wouldn't tell because there's so many details being given about the lead female, Mary, the corporate scientist guy, and then the true cyborg where it's a human melded with a robot has both sides fighting against one another. He's going into such, literally what should have been a panel is full of nothing but text of third-person narration telling you about these characters and their thoughts and feelings. That's something you wouldn't have happen in almost any other comic book. And I appreciated that because even though I felt like I missed a lot because these characters seem to have a lot going on, I also was fully caught up by what Robinson gives us. He gives us these character pieces. We know who they are now, and we can move forward with his story.
Yeah. Then you just get a lot of action. Don't you, with a lot of characterization in the midst of it all. I struggled with this first bit because I wasn't really sure what mattered in the action. I wasn't really sure which characters mattered, etc. But I do enjoy the fact that everyone is just doing, snippets of their dialogue, so they half get to swear in the comic and things like that.
Yeah, and so this was one, I no longer have the floppies. I sold those off many, many years ago. But at some point between now and then, before I'd even thought about doing a Terminator podcast, I'd stumbled upon a copy of the trade paperback, a little warped. I don't know if it was a sun damage thing, a water damage thing, or what, but it definitely has a weird crinkliness to it when I crack it open. But knowing that I had a physical copy around, I sort of sabotaged myself a little bit. I was doing a lot of reading for various projects all at the same time, and I kept putting off the Terminator stuff because I wanted to read that physical miniseries first. And so I took the book with me to work, and I would read it during my lunch breaks. So I'd have enough time to where I would have my salad for about 10-15 minutes, and then I'd have the half hour to read the comic book. And because Robinson was so detailed, there's so much, not just dialogue, but also so many literary passages where it skirts the line between comic book and prose. It was a dense read. It took a while to read. And I got to this first issue, and I'm reading through it, and I'm just enraptured by all these tangents that he's going on, all these extra details that he's giving. But then you get to the big action sequence, and this being a book coming out in the early 90s, I'd have to check to see whether this was before or after the LA riots, but it feels like the book is attempting to invoke that. The imagery definitely invokes that, whether it anticipates it or is reflecting it. And it was just a wild ride for me because you're going through all this heavy novelistic approach, getting into the characters, getting into their psyches, explaining their motivations, and then you have this long action sequence that's extremely violent, and there's just so many details going on. There's helicopters and there's cop cars, and there's just so much happening, and it was completely absorbing me. Just absolutely enraptured reading this first issue. And of course, if you are a Blue Lives Matter person, if you're a Thin Blue Line person, you're watching all these noble police officers step up before this horrific, unstoppable killing machine, and they're just being killed left and right, and it's just horrifying, the human toll and the valiant efforts of these policemen. But if you don't like cops, you're killing a lot of cops, man. There's just a lot of cops getting killed here, man. Oh.
Yeah. But, I mean, do you think in all of these Terminator works, pretty much the Terminator gets stripped of the human skin pretty quickly? Do you think that's just because he wants to do it for the artists, or
yeah, because I think
is there a plot reason?
Your reading jumped around, and there aren't a ton of miniseries in this first round from Dark Horse, so I wanted to make sure I had everything straight in my head and that I was giving the stories their full benefit. So I read all the material through into Endgame, and so that means I'm going from the first miniseries to this one fairly fluidly, but I don't recall specifics. I thought that there were perhaps 2 Terminators left at the end of that miniseries. There was a black one and a white one, essentially. And I think we see a few moments of the white one at the beginning of this comic, so it must be that one that's still active. But as you say, they deglove him pretty quickly. And I think it's because Gulacy had that image of a Terminator in leather and essentially doing a Ghost Rider, specifically the Texera Ghost Rider, or Javier Solteri's, I guess I should say. I'm not sure who came up with the design for the 90s series, but it doesn't really make sense for the endoskeleton to be able to fill out that leather so fully, but it is such a striking visual for the endoskeleton to be inside the biker gear, and that visual is throughout the miniseries, so I have to assume that Gulacy wanted that, and Robinson obliged him.
Yeah. I mean, it does look cool. You can't get around it.
I don't know that Gulacy's the best guy to draw the endoskeleton. It looks a little off model a lot of the time, but once he actually gets it into the leather and it's just the skull sticking out the top, that's cool. That's a striking image.
Yeah.
And did I mention a whole bunch of cops get killed in this thing? Like, it's just left and right, just boom, boom, boom. This reminds me a lot, again, I brought The Matrix before, but one of the things that works so well about the first Matrix movie that gets lost in the later ones is that countercultural, anti-authoritarian quality that it has. The fact that our heroes are going into an office building and just gunning down various authority figures, cops, rent-a-cops, mercenaries, federal agents, all this kind of stuff, and they are unambiguously the good guys, and the bad guys are all the fascists. Whatever form fascism takes, they're blowing them away. I would not be shocked, given their background, that they may have read this comic book, because I see parallels between this comic and The Matrix, and I have that level of excitement about seeing, this conflict between what would normally be this authoritarian force that could do whatever they wish, especially in the wake of the LA riots and Rodney King and everything, and then they're meeting a force that's well beyond them. And also reading it today, being a Texan, having read up on everything to do with Uvalde and how those cops did not step up to protect anybody but themselves, there's a little bit of catharsis in this for me. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah. The landscape has changed. I mean, particularly in Australia, cops is still seen as a fairly reputable vocation. I think that's what I want to say. But certainly from my understanding of everything in your country, it's not so much. I think Australians still trust cops because the bad cops are more well hidden and they've got less power. I don't know, but certainly in your country, it's pretty horrendous.
I think a big difference is the disarming in the 1990s where you guys like had some spree killings and were like, no, we're not going to tolerate this, and just people got rid of their guns for the most part. And so it's a lot easier to have a good relationship with authority figures when everybody's trying to shoot one another. I think that goes a long way towards building trust when everybody doesn't have the opportunity to shoot each other if they're so inclined.
Yeah. That wasn't a controversial thing to do in Australia. It was just like, oh yeah, we'll get rid of all the guns. And we did.
Now,
there was no politics or, anything connected to that.
Now, I do understand that sometime in the 80s and 90s, y'all had some issues with Queensland, right?
Queensland is like a separate part of the country as far as it's... it kind of hates the rest of the country, and it hates people who are educated and people who have prospects, I think. Mike lives in Queensland.
Sorry. He doesn't listen to this show. It'll be fine.
No, but there's a lot of... In Queensland, they always vote differently to everyone else. Yeah, their values seem a little bit different. Queensland is the Florida of Australia. Okay. So pretty much. Enough
said. But given that so many people in our community are flocking to Florida all of a sudden, I don't mind throwing a little gasoline on that particular fire. I can't say too much, though. I'm in text, so, glass houses and all that. The September 1991 cover-dated Wizard Magazine #1, with a Todd McFarlane Spider-Man Wizard cover, offers a batch of picks from the Wizard's hat, their recommended titles. There's a whole slew of these things across several pages, but only 4 get full blurbs across 2 pages. Terminator's secondary objectives, Mechanical Mayhem Mexican Style. Title, Terminator's secondary objectives #2 of 4. Writer James Robinson, artist Paul Gulacy, Carl Kiesel, cover price $250. I'll be back, and they are. In part 2 of the Smash sequel, the new female Terminator, Z000.M, has arrived upon the LA shore after traveling 400 miles across the ocean floor, and she's not happy. Meanwhile, Sarah Connor tries to escape to Mexico with Terminator 890L hot on her trail. I think they've confused characters there. All this while Dudley, the half-human, half-Terminator creature, struggles with his machine side. By the way, the back cover copy reads, in 1990, Marvel Comics broke all records when Spider-Man #1 sold more copies than any comic ever published. We were just warming up. X-Men #1, on sale in August. And there's a thin bar of several X-Men drawn by Jim Lee, including Wolverine, Psylocke, Gambit, Cyclops, Rogue, and the Beast.
Terminator, Secondary Objectives #2 arrived on August 6, 1991. Other new releases that month include Captain Planet and the Planeteers, Dinosaurs Attack, Transverse, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, and Nightmares on Elm Street, with a wicked painted cover by Hollywood concept artist Miles Tevis.
Excerpt from the July 1991 cover dated Amazing Heroes #192. Coming distractions for August. Dark Horse Comics offers Badlands #2, Cheval Noir #21, Concrete Fragile Creature #4, The Creepy Trade Paperback, Dark Horse Presents #53, Deadface Doing the Islands with Bacchus #2, Iron Hand of Almeric #2, The Mask #1, Outlanders #32, Race of Scorpions #2, Tank Girl #4, Venus Wars #5, and Terminator's Secondary Objectives #2 of 4.
Solicitation copy reads, after traveling 400 miles across the Pacific Ocean floor, Z000.M, our new gal Terminator, finally sets foot upon the LA shore, wreaking havoc in her wake. In the meantime, our freedom fighters have hightailed it down to Mexico in an attempt to find and protect Sarah Connor. C890.L is also on his way down to Mexico, not to protect Sarah, but to kill her. Dudley, the half-human, half-Terminator, is struggling with his machine side, and Dr. Hollister is back to doing his dirty deeds. Somewhat counterintuitively, the cover of this issue features a T-800 killing the LAPD, yes all of them, while the first issue had Cyborg Rider, which only manifested at the very end and is more prevalent in this one. But also, that felt like a first issue cover, and this feels like a second. The Terminatrix walked onto the beach on a Monday morning, murdering a sunbathing couple for their clothes. We do remember the part where Arnold Schwarzenegger ordered the pump gang to give it their clothes, and only started killing them when they turned violent. The Dark Horse stories are homicidal by default in a way that I start to feel nauseated whenever anyone is approached by a Terminator, because I know they're about to be unalived in a grim manner. I'm not a wimp, and I know half the name of my own podcast means one who indeadens, but the creepy serial killer flavor is just a tad off from formula. Yes, They're genocidal machines, but machines designed to pass as human and keep a low profile so that they don't create a situation where armies mobilize against them. Slaughtering a major metropolitan police force on the streets without any real cause is just sensationalistic storytelling. That being said, Robinson spends 2 pages on the Terminatrix posing as a prostitute to secure a hotel room and transportation that establishes a base of operations. We go through the unsuspecting John's inner life with the full knowledge that he's about to be murdered, and that alone is more effective storytelling than the entire Now Comics volume. I also spoke a bit too soon about Gulacy's Lady Faces, because the Terminatrix has a cold inhumanity that I haven't seen from him before, and he's one of my favorite artists, so I've seen a lot. Mary dreamed of the death of her father, Vince, while being flown in a stolen prop plane by the rebel cyborg. Later in the issue, she asks his real, human name. He doesn't like it, but finally confesses Dudley, and her laughter pleases him. They have plenty of money stolen from an ATM, again mirroring T2, to buy nice lodging and supplies in Mexico City. Dudley is still receiving programming commands and occasional signals from the other Terminators. The plan is to draw any T-800s after Sarah Connor to them first, and have a trap laid to eliminate the threat. Mary relishes her time in this time, but quietly. She also allows Dudley some rest, when he dreams of making love to her, but then being choked by his own machine side. Back in Los Angeles, Detective Sloan has saved Ibarra, and is working the case, but keeps coming back to the fantastical, inescapable conclusion of robots. Ed Aston had also stayed behind in LA, recognizing news of the Terminatrix's beach murders for exactly what they were. Eventually, he reached out to Dr. Hollister, hopeful for a resource with a softened heart after their recent experiences. Hollister played the part, but all he really wants is access to the T-800 that he knows is still active in the present. The leather-clad biker Terminator killed yet another gun store owner for more arms and the requisite post-mortem tableau. Crossing the border, he leaves a gas station a fiery wreck. When the bike runs out of gas, it jumps onto a shipping rig, decouples its load, and tosses the driver aside. The final scene shows him leaving the bodies of some corrupt federal A's to bake under the desert sun. It's all very Randall Tex Cobb in Raising Arizona. I suppose Robinson moving from one Coen Brothers influence to another between projects.
Excerpt from the September 1991 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 194, Newsline. Comics bestsellers for August, courtesy of Capital City's internal correspondence. There was no dark horse in the top 10, half of which was dominated by different versions of X-Men number 1, as well as Infinity Gauntlet number 4, Spider-Man number 15, Batman Holy Terror, that's obviously in the dollar share, X-Force number 3, Uncanny X-Men number 281, X-Factor number 71 came in at number 9 when you go by circulation. But from the top 10 independent comics in dollars, you have Terminator Secondary Objectives number 2 at first place, Twilight Zone number 1 prestige format, Queen of the Damned number 1, The Spider number 3, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 36, The Vampire Lestat slipcase, so obviously the dollar share is really heavily weighted toward how much that cost, Magnus Robot Fighter number 6, Green Hornet number 2, and Elf Quest miniseries number 7, and Solar Man of the Hour number 3. Secondary Objectives continue to top the ranks in circulation for independent comics, mostly the same aside from some placement shifting. Joining the top 10 on circulation are Darkwing Duck number 1 from Disney and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Adventures number 26. Dark Horse continues to be the third place publisher at 1.83% of the market, followed by Malibu, Innovation, Eclipse, Comic Images, Now, Disney, and Fantagraphics. And among the top 10 black and whites in circulation were Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 36, the Elf Quest miniseries, Savage Sword of Conan number 190, Dark Horse Presents number 53, North Star's Clown Shock number 1, Lone Wolf and Cub number 49, Cerebus number 149, Venus Wars number 6, Cry for Dawn number 6, and Conan Saga number 55. So getting into issue number 2, we finally get the Terminatrix out of the drink, a little bit more cheesecake from old Gulacy. We do get exactly what you were talking about. Let's do a flashback or flash forward to Mary's life growing up with giant robots coming in and blasting people in skies of fire. It's exactly what you said you were appreciating wasn't in the first issue, right there in your second issue.
Yeah, and then we get another robbing the gun store scene.
And this was one of the things that really stuck with me from my first reading, was a sequence in which the cyborg is dreaming about his lust for Mary, and that calls in the cyborg side of him to hate his weakness, hate his lust, get back back on mission. If you're not going to get on mission, I would just assume that you die. That was not something that I'd seen in any of the Terminator media before this, a true cyborg. And going back and reading this, I kept waiting for that part because that was the part that really made me feel like I was missing something from the previous issues. Even though if you read the previous miniseries, this character is very minor for most of it, and then he has a face turn in the last issue. So there really wasn't a lot with this guy before this miniseries, but this miniseries really helps to develop him.
Yeah, and I mean, you can appreciate this story. I feel like every single Terminator film after the second one is just an exercise in people trying to tell a story while other people are interfering with that story in every single way and telling them what they have to have, add in budgetary constraints and time and things like that. But yeah, it always seems like they're heavily compromised, whereas I feel like these stories are kind of pure. They get to say what they want to do, they get to focus on what they want to do. They are moving a shared plot forward, but it seems like everyone's on the same page as far as intention.
Robinson knows what he's doing. He knows that he's telling a Terminator story. He's making sure that every issue you get a sequence of the rampage of a Terminator, you get your random killings, you get reminded of the threat of these characters all the time. But also, Robinson has that love of the 40s, he loves the 50s, he loves noir. And so, despite that, he's always finding a way to get a detective into this story who's doing an investigation, who's running down clues, who's trying to figure out what's going on, which is a tricky thing because we know what's going on as the audience. So it's hard to have a guy look good when he's trying to catch up with us. But because he's coming at it at different angles, and because his investigation is allowing us to get back to things like what was happening at Cyberdyne, the Aston character, the Hollister character, it's funny because he's behind us, but he's coming at what we know from a perspective that we don't have, and he's digging up information that we did not have before. So ultimately, he is serving the story. So it's an interesting hybrid where you've got the detective story happening, but you've also got the action adventure, and I think that he serves both extremely well. It's I think much better balanced in this miniseries than it was in the one shot.
Yeah, the story works quite well because it really is just a side quest to everything that's happening in the Sarah Connor main story in the movies, because a lot of the objective of these characters is to protect Sarah Connor from these particular Terminators so they don't intrude in that plot. So it's actually quite a good space to work in because you can have the Sarah Connor stuff is still happening, it still matters, and it still comes to its conclusion that's in the cinema. But here, there's all this, what you didn't know was also going on at the same time to protect her.
And you've got two of my favorite sequences from the miniseries. As you say, his tendency to want to go off and tell you a lot of background details on the victims of the Terminators, to humanize them, to give them a sense of loss. Like, they're not just cannon fodder, these were people, they had lives, they had experiences, and then those lives are cut short. The two that really get to me are the gun shop owner, because they give you a list of information about this person that I would not be politically inclined towards. I'm not exactly rooting for their survival, but I 100% know that guy. I've read the story of what usually happens when that person comes down from their bedroom above the gun store, and it doesn't go the way that it usually goes in the story, a lot of these stories. But you feel it because you know that person, and it makes sense how things work out. And then later on, you've got the David Collins character who gets picked up by this gorgeous woman, and this has never happened to him, and he's always wanted this, and he can't believe it's finally happening. And you totally see why he wouldn't see the knife coming for his gut. He's so lost in the fantasy of finally getting that thing that he thought he should have or hoped for and thought he would never have, and it undoes him, and you feel that knife in the gut just like he feels it, because you know what's coming, you know who he's with, you know what she wants, you know that it's not going to end well for him. So it's just that building tragedy, that inescapable falling that he's going to have as a result of this hubris that we can all relate to.
Yeah, it's a little incel horror story in the middle of this comic.
But that's what's great too, is the incel elements, that misogynistic quality is given to the gun shop owner. This guy, he's pudgy, he's balding, he's not the guy who's ever going to score with someone who looks like the Terminatrix. And of course, she's dressed in all these other Terminators, they want to go and they want to be clad neck to toe in leather. And then she's the only one who has to go out and get a mini skirt and high heels. And it's like, well, I guess they made you a woman for a reason, rather than just making you another Arnold Schwarzenegger. But boy, you're leaning into it, ain't you? You see the Federales at the end of the book. You're seeing this wave of mutilation, all this destruction that's in the wake of the Terminators, and it gives you that, again, it builds toward the inevitable conflict. You're fearing for your protagonists because nobody else is faring well against these guys, and they're sharks. There's just nothing that can stop them. They're just constantly moving forward, and God help you if the teeth catch you.
Yeah.
Terminator Secondary Objectives Number 3 was released on September 3rd, 1991, joined that month by a Back to the Future special, Carnival of Souls, Child's Play 3, Clive Barker's Book of the Damned, a Hellraiser companion, Doll Man, Married, with Children, NBC Saturday Morning Comics, Children of the Puppet Master, and 2000 Maniacs, as well as the 250th issue of Marvel's Conan the Barbarian, and their final issue of Zorro.
Excerpt from the August 1991 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 193, Coming Distractions for September, out of Dark Horse Comics, Badlands number 3, Billy 99 number 1, Book of Night Collection, Cheval Noir number 22, Dark Horse Presents number 54, Dead Face number 3, Deadline USA number 1, Flaming Carrot number 26, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis number 4, The Mask number 2, Outlanders number 33, Predator Cold War number 1, Race of Scorpions number 3, Vampirella number 1 of 4, Venus Wars number 6, Terminator Tempest Limited Edition, the signed and limited 2,000 copies edition of Dark Horse's first Terminator series by Arcudi, Warner, and Guinan. Color hardcover, $69.95, 112 pages. And finally, Terminator Secondary Objectives number 304.
Solicitation copy reads, Lieutenant Sloan learns the Terminator Tango Z000.M is in Los Angeles wreaking havoc. With Lieutenant Sloan hot on her heels, literally, it was inevitable that the two of them should tango, face to face, or should that be mano a mano? In the meantime, Dr. Hollister is proceeding apace with his plans to create the artificial intelligence that will spawn Terminator technology, and the fate of the world be damned. Back in Mexico, Mary, rebel leader of the soldiers from the future, faces off with C-890.L, who has tracked her and the half-human, half-Terminator 1825.M down in their Mexican lair. Dr. Bertram Hollister talked aloud to himself about how many grant donors had dismissed his work as science fiction, how his access to the T-800 technology would change all that, and how all he needed was Dr. Aston to play the fall guy in answer to all those questions the police had. Except Ed had decided to check on things before the planned meet-up, and heard all of Hollister's incriminating lack of an internal monologue. Ed was concerned that his presence outside had riled up Hollister's dogs, only to realize that it wasn't him, but rather the stalking Terminatrix. Before it could execute Ed Aston, the Terminatrix was shot in the wrist by Detective Mark Sloan, who had also been staking out Hollister. Where he had looked a bit like Clive Reston before, Sloan was suddenly decked out in full Miami Vice Sonny Crockett ensemble, complete with a subtle mullet. Anyway, things go poorly for him as Sloan nearly blows himself up with an errant cigarette after a gas tank is exposed. Aston escapes in a car, having befriended one of Hollister's dogs, and intends to drive to Mexico City to reunite with Mary. The Terminatrix should get there first, as she murdered a technician and stole her own small prop plane. The rear guard was activated as the Terminator was heading into Mexico City. Dudley had refused to acknowledge its request for location pings, but with the arrival of the Terminatrix, the evil cyborgs were able to triangulate Dudley's position via GPS. Now, the script uses more obtuse techno-jargon phrasing for technology that didn't exist when this was written, but that's the gist of it. So now Dudley knew about the new player, and both knew his approximate location. Dudley was still struggling to set his trap, which should have taken hours, but had expanded to days, thanks to the failings of period materials. He would need Mary to help buy time, and also additional supplies, in case they had to bug out and abandon the delicate trap. Time ran out, as Mary spotted the Terminator first, and led him on a not-so-merry chase. It passed muster at the time, but now I wince a bit at all of the Mexican citizens being dressed like peasants in loose, ragged, ethnically coded clothes with sandals. Also, they get gunned down as barely acknowledged collateral damage between the cyborg and the important white people. Another car's gas tank gets exploded, and where on the first one the effect went cheap to focus on Sloane's running from it, this time we get a full splash with lush tonal shading. Mary gets lured into a dead end by the Terminator using Dudley's voice, but the real one shows up right on time with a proton pack on his back. Well, okay, it only sort of looks like that. Actually, he fires magnetic electroconductors onto the Terminator, then connects it to the Mexico City power grid, which proceeds to black out from all the misappropriated voltage. It was the non-response from the downed Terminator that prompted the Terminatrix's mobility.
Excerpt from the October 1991 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 195, Newsline. Comics bestsellers for September. Top 10 books overall were Spider-Man number 16, X-Men number 2, X-Force number 4, Infinity Gauntlet number 5, Fantastic Four number 358, Sandman Special number 1, Wolverine Reign of Terror, Predator Cold War number 1, Ghost Rider number 19, and Uncanny X-Men number 282. In terms of top 10 independent comics on dollar share, first place went to Predator Cold War number 1, followed by Terminator Secondary Objectives number 3, Mouse and Survivor's Tale 2 from Random House, Indiana Jones number 4, Vampirella number 1, Crazy Man number 1, Night of the Living Dead number 1, this is the Fantico series, Kato number 1, Interview with the Vampire number 2, and Magnus Robot Fighter number 7. In circulation, it's pretty much the same. Mouse drops off. Solar Man of the Atom number 4 jumps on, joined by Green Hornet number 3 in 9th, and Twilight Zone number 1 in 10th. Dark Horse continues to be the number 3 publisher, making a gain at 4.23% of the market, followed by Malibu, Innovation, Comic Images, Continuity, Eclipse, Now, and Walt Disney. The top 10 black and whites in circulation were OMAC number 1, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 39, Vampirella number 1, Dark Horse Presents number 54, Night of the Living Dead number 1, Savage Sword of Conan number 191, Baseball Superstars number 1, Cerebus number 150, Usagi Yojimbo number 30, and Venus Wars number 6.
Cracking open the next 2 issues.
As much as I was enjoying the earlier issues in the story, as the pace picks up, my investment sort of starts to dwindle a little bit, just because more of an action movie, and once the characters start to fight one another, it's fighting McFightingstein for most of the other 2 issues. The one thing that did get me, though, is you've got that one page in which the Terminatrix is running into the police officer, Sloane, and there's this one panel where it's an extreme close-up on her heel as she's walking toward the police officer. And we've seen shots like that in the past, but it's just so odd to me to see it done with a woman in stiletto heels that close up. And it's almost abstract because there's not a lot of room for detail to make this work. And I'm not a foot guy. This isn't doing anything for me if anybody's questioning the Tarantino-ism at all. But it's just such an unusual angle to come at from. And I just never see a comic book with a drawing of a heel and a little bit of calf like this. It just really grabs me because I just haven't seen that. I've read so many comic books and it's just so unique of a way of and all the elements you need are there. You've got the smoking cigarette, you've got the trail of gasoline, you know what's coming, and for them to pack all those elements in, plus that little fan service for the foot fetishists, I'm just shocked that they pulled that off.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting choice, a book where you could have done boring choices. I was struck by the fact that all this came out before the internet was on people's phones, and it has about the cyborgs, the Terminators are basically communicating with each other via internet or Wi-Fi or something, which I thought was quite an interesting thing to look back at. I think at this point, this is where they triangulate the position of Dudley because they have a second Terminator in the mix. Is that right?
That's correct. And I love that. There was an element in the Now comics that was so frustrating to me because they literally have a Terminator flown from Florida to NORAD because Skynet has to directly communicate with the cyborg face to face. And that it was so frustrating a notion to me, just so deeply analog in such a non-speculative fiction, non-sci-fi, dumb way. And just something as simple as a convenient, because they had car cell phones and stuff by this time. They did exist, the technology did exist. And I love that Robinson just simply extrapolated upon that. And it's yes, of course, they're just able to essentially by telepathy, but it's really probably cellular bouncing off of satellites. And they're just communicating with one another and triangulating one another. That's so much more clever, so much more thoughtful about what to do with this concept in this time period. I love that he did that.
And he just does it as a matter of fact thing. He doesn't do it the way Warren Ellis would. Well look at me, how clever am I for thinking of this?
He has to congratulate himself. I respect Ellis as a futurist, but he'd make sure to let us know, look at how smart I am because of these things I'm telling you about. I read about this in Omni,
Yeah.
The final issue of Terminator, Secondary Objectives, landed on October 1st, 1991, consistently on the first week of every month. New in October were American Tail, 5L Goes West, and Rice's Queen of the Damned, Bill and Ted's Excellent Comic Book, a collection of Warren Murphy's The Destroyer magazine, Doc Savage, The Man of Bronze, with another sharp Brian Stelfreeze cover, Prince, Alter Ego, Reanimator, Weave World, and the final fatal issue of Double Dragon.
Excerpt from the September 1991 cover-dated Amazing Heroes number 194. Coming distractions for October. Dark Horse Comics offers Badlands number 4, Billy 99 number 2, Cheval Noir number 23, Dark Horse Presents number 55, Flaming Carrot number 27, Iron Hand of Ulmeric number 3, The Mask number 3, Predator Cold War number 2, Race of Scorpions number 4, Venus Wars number 7, and Terminator Secondary Objectives number 4.
Solicitation copy reads, Z000.M arrives in Mexico, hot on the heels of her Terminator compadre, C890.L. What Z000.M doesn't know is that C890.L has already had a previous encounter with our merry band of rebels from the future, and they've reprogrammed him to terminate a Terminator, namely Z000.M, so it's mano a mano as the two Terminators duke it out for this robotic slugfest of an issue. The cover is an action shot of a T-800 endoskeleton bursting through a door bearing a high-caliber assault rifle. Inside, the Terminatrix locates the Terminator in Mexico City, only to learn that it had been temporarily reprogrammed by Dudley to terminate the Terminatrix. After 18 pages of Marvel Comics-style mindless brawling, the pair of denuded T-800s brushed metal in a gas-filled sewer, igniting an explosion that destroyed the Terminatrix. The story asserts that a Terminator can never be fully reprogrammed, so the surviving T-800 eventually resets to secondary objectives. However, its functioning is still heavily compromised, and it will need to cannibalize the Terminatrix for parts just to rebuild its lower portion enough to have legs at all. All of the issues had jumped between different storylines, which I streamlined into linear narratives for the synopsis. For instance, this issue actually started 10 days in the future, with Aston having located Mary and Dudley through personal ads in international newspapers. In captions, it was revealed that they had found one of Sarah Connor's booby-trapped safe houses, but that she was already gone, having left a note explaining that if it had been found, she was right to have left to stay ahead of any Terminators. So the mission continues, though Ed is currently preoccupied with ogling Mary. Dudley is struggling with urge to kill, rising, and Mary just can't get enough of the rising and setting sun after life in the perpetually gray future. It's novelistic, but the time jump really robs any immediacy in the action and renders the final issue less a conclusion and more a postscript. It also makes the Terminatrix's whole existence an afterthought, since she's always running late and has no real impact on the overarching narrative.
Excerpt from the November 1991 cover-dated Amazing Heroes number 196. Newsline, Comics Bestsellers October. Again, courtesy of Capital City's internal correspondence newsletter. Top 10 comics in dollars were the Robin 2 Collector's Set number 1, followed by the Direct Edition number 1, Batman Judge Dredd, X-Men number 3, Infinity Gauntlet number 6, the Robin 2 Deluxe Complete Set number 1 through 4, Batman Legends of the Dark Knight Annual number 1, Spider-Man number 17, X-Force number 5, and Deathlock number 6. Without that excess of Robins, Uncanny X-Men number 283 joins, as does Ghost Rider number 20 and Wolverine number 49. Among the top 10 independent comics in dollars, first place again goes to Predator Cold War number 2, followed by Terminator Secondary Objectives number 4, Doc Savage Man of Bronze number 1, this is from Millennium, Magnus Robot Fighter number 8, Solar Man of the Atom number 5, Little Mermaid number 1, Kato number 2, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 40, Dread Rules number 1, and Vintage Magnus number 1. As for circulation, once again, mostly a few swapped places, nothing relevant to our Dark Horse top 2. Coming in on the back end though were Green Hornet number 4 in 9th, and Harbinger number 1 in 10th. Dark Horse continues to be the number 3 publisher at 2.83% of the market, so a bit of a drop, being chased by Malibu, Voyager/Valiant, Disney, Comic Images, Fantagraphics, Now, and Millennium. The top 10 black and whites in circulation were OMAC number 2, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 2, Flaming Carrot number 27, Dark Horse Presents number 55, Savage Sword of Conan number 192, Cerebus number 151, Love and Rockets number 37, Cages number 4, Robotech Sentinels Book 2 number 10, and Conan Saga number 57. So the other thing is that James Robinson puts the toys back. He puts the Terminatrix on the table, he takes the Terminatrix off the table. He starts with one leftover cyborg. It's literally the same cyborg that he started with, or a Terminator I should say, that he started with. It's the same characters. He doesn't kill any of the characters that he did not create. For the most part, everything is right where he left it. You've got the three main characters from the first miniseries still trying to find Sarah Connor to protect her from Terminators, and just leaves everything back into place for the next writer. I feel like that was very respectful of him. He told a story. It was an engaging story, but he didn't break the toys. He didn't make it harder on the next person or as hard for him as it was. He wasn't as hard on somebody else as he had it on him, trying to figure out what to do with what was left remaining. But at the same time, he's not leaving any business for anybody else. They can just pick up basically where the first miniseries left off, and you could actually skip this miniseries if you wanted to, but I wouldn't, because I think it's probably the best Terminator miniseries, certainly the best that I've read so far.
I guess he does the action scenes that sort of end everything. So that, there's a big explosion, takes out one of the Terminators. But he also gives you these really strong visuals, like the electrical stuff that the Dudley uses to take down the Terminator stripped of skin. It's just, that's a really good visual. And in this day and age of 400 covers, that would have been the feature on several of those covers, you'd imagine.
One of my favorite things in comics is Zipatone, and Gulacy at his peak was the master of Zipatone. And I love how when he does the Terminator vision, the red lens, everything is in Zipatone and everything's slightly abstracted, a little bit more impressionistic, whereas he's a guy who puts in so much detail on so many pages that where he slacks off a little bit and lets the Terminator have their somewhat compromised vision. I love how he pulls that off, how it looks, and I wish that other artists had used that technique, because I think it's extremely effective.
Yeah, but I think Chapter 4, the fourth issue, is really good, basically because it has Terminator versus Terminator. You've got the female Terminator versus the reprogrammed skinless one, and it's a great fight, just visually. Yeah, it's exciting.
Excerpt from the January 1992 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 198. Reviews. Rolling Them Bones, a comics crapshoot by Bruce Canwell. Terminator Secondary Objectives number 4. I always liked Paul Gulacy's stuff. I was there to see his professional debut, an episode of a Marvel comic called Fear, featuring the exploits of Morbius the Living Vampire. I liked what I saw, and from Fear I followed Gulacy to Master of Kung Fu and the Warren magazines, then to Saber and / Maraud. Except for occasional work in Marvel Comics Presents, I haven't seen much from Gulacy recently, so when I spotted his hand in the Terminator Secondary Objectives number 4, I decided to forego my usual prejudice against movie-inspired comics, which are never as good as the source material in my opinion, in order to see what Paul is up to these days. This 24-page Dark Horse comic is true to the spirit of the Terminator films, I suppose. For 21 pages, there is nothing but straight-ahead violence, mayhem, and destruction. In direct contrast to Grant Morrison's approach on Doom Patrol, the author surrenders almost complete responsibility for telling the story to the artist. From page 3 to page 23, as Terminators C890.L and Z000.M wail the electric bejesus out of one another, there are 4-word balloons, and the longest caption is a mere 16 words. This art team produces some dynamic visuals. Inker Carl Kessel compliments Gulacy nicely, and colorist Gregory Wright outdoes himself in places. Check out pages 20 and 21. If you ever have to pick the most beautiful explosion in comics history, this gets my vote. And yet I didn't like this comic. Gulacy and company engaged my eyes, but the brainless plot and near absence of text failed to engage my mind. Secondary Objectives number 4 is literally a case of all style, no substance, grade 2 stars. I guess every comic is somebody's first, but judging a book on the 4th issue of a 4-issue miniseries, what a schmuck.
The trade paperback solicitation copy reads, Mechanoid maniacs will find it mandatory to purchase their very own copy of this 112-page volume which collects all 4 issues of last summer's smash success series of The Terminator.
Excerpt from Ian Keogh's review in the Slings and Arrows graphic novel guide. Robinson extrapolates on the capabilities of a Terminator beyond their obvious killing machine status, and how they're able to track and communicate with each other remotely is important. He also supplies some greater depth to the human cast, who were very much on action movie default mode before. The choice of Paul Gulacy as artist is interesting, and perhaps not the first to come to mind for an all-out action story, yet he's very good, incorporating a full range of cinematic techniques into his storytelling and very much redefining the cast. Mary now has a more timeless look than during her first battle with Terminators, and Gulacy's good at establishing a location. Much of the story takes place in Mexico, and he doesn't just draw it as any other American city, but supplies the unique architecture and ensures the people fit the setting. Everything builds to a climactic final scene very different from what might have been expected, cleverly deceptive plotting on Robinson's part. It's an enjoyable ride, delivering pretty well everything you could want from a Terminator plot based on the original model.
Paul Gulacy is easily one of my top 5 artists. I've always loved his work. I know it's quirky. I know it's not for everybody, but I adore it. And so for me, I was absolutely relishing every page of this book. I know that you feel a lot differently about that. So you're probably going to have a little bit more trouble picking a page that you want out of this miniseries versus my trouble with how many pages I wanted. Your page is probably finding one that you do want, I'm guessing.
Oh no, there's lots of beautiful art. It's just I don't find the the woman, a turn on, really, as intended, I think.
Well, and my thing, too, is one of my earlier Gulacy books, besides Master of Kung Fu, was the Valkyrie miniseries. And, of course, not only is she gorgeous in that miniseries, but then you've got people like Brian Boland and Dave Stevens, I think, drawing her. So that very much makes her a bomb, in that miniseries. And I can't help but notice that virtually every Gulacy woman is a variation on Valkyrie, unless he's drawing an Asian woman or something. Pretty much all of his women, especially the lead hero women, including both of the lead females in this miniseries, are essentially Valkyrie with different hair colors. So I'm not going to say that I'm sitting here, I'm not a bad girl fan where I'm like, ooh, heck, sexy lady, but I do appreciate his take on the form.
Yeah. I guess I would go with page 20 from issue 3, which is where they have the electrical weapon to take down the Terminator, and Dudley steps into the tunnel and he's all silhouetted and with lights on the backpack, and it's like a crazy, even a Mignola-esque contraption on his back that fires suckers at the Terminator. I love it.
And given how they've been building that up since the previous issue, it is funny to see, well, the entire city of Mexico City is going to help power us taking you down. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, you did build that up. Good, nice payoff. Again, that heel page is so weird to me that I'm kind of into it, but I think I'd probably want one of the pages from the cop killer sequence, or pages 2 through 3 where you've got Valkyrie wandering around half naked. Much of issue number 1, give me any random page, I'll be a happy camper.
Cool.
New targets acquired.
Andy Leiland, Bill
A.K.A.
The Bartport.
Bill at Spy Final, Billy Hines wrote,
I keep wanting to return to Terminator Tempest for the Warner art, but I've had it maybe 3 times and always get rid of it. He's not on Black Cross or Team 7 level. Those covers are excellent though.
C.H. The Comic Crush.
Comics Fanla.
Dave's Comic Heroes blog. Derek W.C. Dirk Ashton. Ed Moore. At Teal Productions. Fanholes Podcast.
Gas-555
Gavin Rizza. Hashtag True Believer. Yes. Hal Kolbeck.
Hamburger Sauce.
History of Comics Unfilmed.
House of Zan.
Iowa's Joe was the irredeemable Shag. James Cameron Online. Julia Rowell wrote,
Now this is a series of comics I have read scattershot. I remember the covers being striking. The Dark Horse run of the 90s reminds me of what I thought Terminator 2 was going to be like as a kid. Also RoboCop vs. Terminator. Also this is stuck in my head now, seeing Danny DeVito as a Terminator. Now I'm imagining him and Arnold Schwarzenegger in a twisted sequel to Twins but as Terminators. Also Barbie comics were around until 96. I wonder why we never had a crossover with Terminator vs. Barbie. They did Archie vs. the Punisher.
Keith G. Baker. Lamar the Revenger. Maximus. Maxo. Mentally Chill.
Mr. Perturbed.
No Pop.
Pablo Ogondo.
Pine Time wrote,
I can't believe how much there is to mine from this subject. I'm really enjoying this a lot.
Tom Panery's
Popkultur.
Affidavit.
Ralph is Strange.
Richard Field.
Raymond Games.
Rogue Gun Works.
Superbound. Thirsties, New and Used.
Tim Wilsey.
Twins Are Rising.
V Graphics 7. William Stout and others.
And William Lang.
It's 2024 in the month of August, and the battle continues with
The Enemy Within. You have been listening to the Terminator Now, a Rolled Spine podcast. It's in no way associated with Himdale Film Corporation, James Cameron, not even Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm just the best impersonator Frank could find, but I'm pretty good, right? No infringement of rights are intended, and it's all covered by fair use. Anyway, nobody's making any money on this thing, and hardly anyone is listening. So, don't waste your lawyer's time.